Hello, and you are listening to the Book Was Better podcast, the podcast where we talk about the book of the film. I'm Luke.
I'm Lauren.
And this week we're talking about Independence Day.
Hey you, put down the popcorn and turn off the light. It's gonna be alright, my friend. In the end, take my hand. Trust me, the book was better.
America. I can't say the rest.
Snuggle, yeah.
We're here to save the mother snuggling day, yeah.
Wow. I mean, isn't this amazing? Like, it's not quite the 4th of July. It's actually, this is going to be going out on the 7th of July. But America has so much freedom that surely it can leak out a couple of extra days, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, if fireworks and freedom are correlations, I've had freedom for the past 3 weeks. Every night.
You've been doing the fireworks thing?
Not me, my neighbors.
Okay, and nobody, like, I was reading today about a guy, very sad, that, like, set a firework off on top of his head and, like, exploded his head.
Yeah, sounds about right.
Yeah, and he was a Gaston at Disneyland. And
Yeah?
we've talked about the Gastons before on, like, FP Cast. You know, they are amazing. They're very tough, confident guys that show their muscles, that interact with the kids. Very funny. This guy thought nobody fights like Gaston, nobody lets fireworks off on their head like Gaston. And talk about Independence Day, his head became independent of his body, I believe. So that was a very unfortunate thing. So I'm glad that you're safe.
Well, the thing about America, everyone has the freedom to be stupid.
That's true. Yes, absolutely. Embrace that. So this is a celebration. I'm obviously not American, but I'm hoping that today I can be an honorary American and have the freedom to really get inspired by my favorite president, Bill Pullman, as we look at Independence Day. A book that I believe he wanted to do for a very long time, except it's a very long book.
Surprisingly long and surprisingly small font, yes. And no chapters.
Yeah, it's about 300 pages and very, very small font. I didn't start reading it until yesterday, and when I opened it up, I almost wanted to back out. I wanted to...
No.
A little bit of a jihad out against America, but then decided, no, this is a day of celebration. I've got to wave the flag just as proudly as anybody else. So, Lauren, tonight, we celebrate our Independence Day.
This morning.
Yeah, this morning for you. Of course, this is Skype because you are a real American, right?
In the flesh, real life, born and raised American.
And although this is Skype, we are looking at each other, and I can see that you have an American flag painted on your face today, which is beautiful. You're wearing a big Uncle Sam hat with a hamburger resting on top of it, so that's excellent. You keep waving that gun around, which is beautiful.
The only guns I have are right here. Boom.
Oh!
Sorry, visual joke.
Check out the gun show. You should have seen what I just saw.
Well, you should see my tattoo of the eagle with the flag and the french fries. Cheese.
Oh, that's fantastic.
I'll show you later.
Were the french fries, like, instead of feathers, or are they, like, coming out of his mouth, or...
Yeah, he's stuffing his face with the french fries.
Look, that brings a tear. Never forget. What a country. So, I guess we're going to learn a lot about Independence Day because this is look, Independence Day's been around for a while, I believe. It's not a new thing. But this was the film that really made it a special thing for a lot of us, especially a lot of us around the world. 1996 was Independence Day, and I do actually remember it coming out. It was an event because this was the first time, as far as I can recall, that there was actually a midnight showing of a film. And I did line up and go and see Independence Day at midnight when it came out. And I rewatched it again for this, and this is only the second time I watched it. And in many ways, I mean, this really was the birth of the modern blockbuster in terms of the structure, the length, the...
bloatedness.
Yeah.
Cheesiness.
And certainly for Roland Emmerich and Dean Devlin, they have just perfected this formula here of, you meet all these different characters all around the country or the world, and then this big disaster happens, and they all sort of end up merging together to this big conclusion. So I don't think it's a very good film / book, but at the same time, this is an event. This is one of those big ones. And so definitely worthy of our study / scorn.
I probably saw it in the theater as a 16-year-old. I don't remember. The one that I remember seeing in the theater was Armageddon, which was after this, I think.
It's the same film. Doesn't matter.
It is, and it has the same 10 endings.
Yeah. The only thing that's a shame about this is that this book's not written by Whitley Strieber, who wrote the Day After Tomorrow novelization. And he's the guy that claims to have been abducted by aliens in real life. So I don't know if they just hadn't... Maybe they met up with him because of this book or because of this film. I don't know. I have a feeling that if he'd been around those guys at the time, that perhaps he would have been involved. Because this is so right up his alley. In the same way that the aliens were up his alley when he was abducted that time.
Sorry.
Up his back alley. Don't.
I shouldn't encourage.
Don't encourage a lame, obvious anal probe reference.
Well, that's why I'm in my office today, because last time when I recorded with you, I had got complaints from my husband that I was laughing too loud, and I woke him up.
It was too funny.
Too funny.
Too funny for your husband.
Funny.
He said, hey, I'm trying to sleep here. Turn on that funny a little bit. Christ's sake. Exactly. Well, don't worry. I'm at this stage, I'm not quite as funny as last time, so it's good. We should be alright. We'll see how we go. I'm not gonna stretch myself. So now this novelization's interesting because it has 3 authors credited. 2 of which are Dean Devlin and Roland Emmerich, which is just such bullshit. I mean, they're the writers-directors of the film, but no one believes that they were sitting at the typewriter writing out the novelization as well.
That's right. Well, it does not count because they wrote the script, so it counts as writer.
Yeah, but novelizations don't normally do that. They'll say, based on the screenplay by such and such, such and such. This is, as audacious as when Alan Dean Foster wrote Star Wars and it was credited as by George Lucas. Yeah.
That's not fair.
No, well, it's not. I mean, how long... I guess these things don't take that long to write, but I can't imagine the filmmaker sitting down and bothering doing it. So really the author here is Stephen Molstad, and he's the author of Godzilla, which was the Matthew Broderick version. Yeah, it was a giant lizard with Matthew Broderick's face. The Patriot novelization, and a bunch of Independence Day spin-offs. So if you like this book, if it he's got at least I think 3 other novels set in the Independence Day universe. What threads are hanging from this book that needed further exploration? I have absolutely no idea, because this covers the first meeting and the destruction of the alien. So, I don't know, maybe it's about the other people that weren't America who are saving the world.
There's other people in the world?
Well, we get little glimpses of them. We get little glimpses of them here. We even get a little mention of Australia, which... so maybe that's it. Maybe there's a novelization about what happened when Australia confronted the aliens. And, a Sam Wertho type stood out on his veranda and went, "Hey, piss off, you aliens! Get out of here!" "Oh, I'm sorry, mate. I didn't mean that. Come on over here and have a beer with us. Have a corking up. I'm a durry, though. Space durry. Space durries. Interesting."
Sure.
So yeah, well, now you don't need to read the book. I've probably just summed it up. God, Lauren, Independence Day. We're putting it off. Let's get into it. Let's read the beginning. Okay. You give us the first sentence. This is a nightmare on Skype, but let's try it anyway.
The Sea of Tranquility was an eerily still wasteland, a silent crater-shaped outdoor tomb of ashes and stone. 2 sets of footprints were etched into the powdery gray soil surrounding the landing site.
How packed was that first sentence? Is it a sea? Is it a wasteland? Is it a crater? Is it a tomb? Is it made of ash? Is it made of stone? What's he doing? On the horizon, a curved sliver of bright earth was rising into the sky, the vivid blue of its oceans a stark contrast to the colourless valley.
Hammered into the lunar surface were the sensor rods of a seismometer, a square box capable of detecting the crash of a sea seismometer at a distance of 50 miles, and on the far side of the camp, an American flag waving proudly in a non-existent breeze.
USA! USA! America has conquered the moon! You bastards! You had no plans for that thing, did you? Like, you went up there, walked around on it, put a flag in it, went, this is kind of boring, and came home and watched Happy Days. Probably not Happy Days, it was the 60s, right? Was Happy Days set in the... Happy Days was set in the 50s, so...
Yep, exactly.
But made in the 70s, right?
That's right. All in the Family?
Yeah. I'm a sort of moon landing was a hoax thing. I think that was you guys just trying to pull the wool over the eyes of the rest of the world.
Well, you're entitled to your wrong opinions.
Well, do something exciting with the moon and we'll talk. But a little bit of editorializing here from Molstad about the moon shenanigans.
Armstrong and Aldrin had taken one giant step for man and left behind a ton of garbage for moonkind.
That's the American way. I mean, look, it worked for Iraq, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a matter of policy. But look, don't worry. Something very sinister is on the way to mess America up. Then a vast shadow moved across the sky. It passed directly overhead, eclipsing the sun and plunging the entire crater into an unnatural darkness. Whatever it was much too large to have been sent from Earth. So, something from... If it's not from Earth, it's got to be from space, right?
That would be the theory, yes.
So, something from space is on its way to our planet. I hope America's going to stand up and police this. Look, you say, like, well, why does America have to save the world? To be fair, like, if a country is willing to spend so much on missiles and things at the expense of, education, healthcare, all that sort of stuff, then absolutely they should be the ones to take this on. Who's better equipped? Like, they have made that sacrifice to protect us from space aliens.
Mm-hmm. You're welcome.
Yes. Yeah. You were part of that policy making, I assume? No. Anyway, there's immediate signs, as we said, that this is a 300-page adult novel with small print. And I've been in the world of junior novelizations lately, the playground of junior novelization, so this was a bit of a shock. So in the film, SETI, which stands for, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, gets a message from outer space, whereas in the book, we get the full resume of SETI employee Richard Yamaro and the equivalent of a Wikipedia entry on the history of SETI. Then we get a whole page of him playing office golf. He's like putting the golf ball into a cup. But anyway, the main thing is they get the signal from space.
Shore walked over to the room's only window, pulled back the curtain a few inches, and scrutinized the crescent moon. Looks like we might have visitors. Then, after a moment of reflection, she added, "It would have been nice if they called first."
They are very literally calling first. Like, they're sending an advance signal, Shore, you dummy. And that's like the punchline that ends that little bit of a chapter, but the whole thing is about them calling first. That's what all of this is about. So, yeah. You had one job, Shore, and you spoiled it. And sounds for a moment here. Like, I know not everybody loves this film, but it could have been worse. Could have been a very different movie, because at the Pentagon, General Gray, who's the commander-in-chief of the United States Space Command, I love that there is a position of somebody who's the chief of Space Command. Like, space is a whole lot of nothing. So this guy, commands bugger all.
I don't think that's a real job.
Look, what are you saying? That's like finding out Santa Claus doesn't exist. Come on.
What?
That's like, how do you like it? So he makes a very startling observation.
Gray, the only non-scientist in the group, wasn't about to start asking a bunch of asinine questions. Instead, he glowered down at the blurry image for a moment before announcing his opinion. It looks like a big turd.
I believe that's actually the summary on the Rotten Tomatoes page on IMDb. Then we meet President Thomas Whitmore, played by the amazing Bill Pullman, who's described only as a 48-year-old. Now, something I do notice about the writing here really likes to let us know how old everybody is. So, if you got a bit of pen and paper, you want to do up a little bit of a graph, look at the comparative ages, anybody out there, put it down in your journal. This is something we can definitely cover. So, Bill Pullman, Thomas Whitmore, 48 years old, and one of the things Marilyn Whitmore loved the most about her husband was his inability to lie. Now, that seems to me like a missed opportunity. Like, wouldn't it have been great if the whole film then veered off into a Jim Carrey liar-liar-esque comedy about this president that always has to tell the truth? Like, isn't that ironic? Because politicians, they lie all the time. And then you gotta, like, that's a movie. Why isn't that a movie already?
Sounds like a movie goal. You should write that down. Write that script, Luke. Get going.
I'm gonna do it. Do it now?
Right now.
Or should we keep going? All right. Well, thanks for listening, everybody. Listen to the other shows. I gotta write a terrible script. But look. Not everything's peachy in the White House. It sounds like there might be a little bit of a scandal brewing. In that case, I have a confession to make, Whitmore told her. I'm lying in bed next to a beautiful young brunette. As he said this, the small figure on the other side of the bed stirred slightly, vaguely aware she was being talked about. Whitmore pulled back the sheet to reveal the sleeping face of his 6-year-old daughter, Patricia, who had graced her pillowcase with a tiny drill mark. Phew, I thought that was going really dark for a moment there. It'd be great, though. Who wouldn't vote for a president that makes, like, sex jokes about his young child?
Oh, do you know who that young child grew up to be?
No, I don't, actually.
Do you ever watch Arrested Development?
Yes.
She's Anne.
Who's Anne? Is
The
Anne
girlfriend that no one remembers. Egg.
Egg, yeah. And Mae Whitman.
Yes, that's her.
Roxy Richter and Scott Pilgrim. I love her.
Yes. Mm-hmm,
okay,
her.
no, I did not notice that. So the president gets the news about this signal coming from outer space, but I'm actually more interested in this rather intense description of Jeff Goldblum, who really is playing the same character as he did in Jurassic Park, which was Jeff Goldblum. He's playing chess in a New Jersey park, and we're going to jump around a bit now because we have to meet quite a lot of extra characters. So this is some really good Jeff Goldblum writing.
David was tall, gaunt, and intense, with a mop of curly black hair. Although he was in his late 30s, he played with the concentration of a child building a house of cards. His fingers smushed his face into strange expressions, and his long limbs coiled around one another at odd, uncomfortable-looking angles. Completely focused on the game, he was totally unaware of looking like a human pretzel.
Why wasn't that a tie-in with like Wetzel's Pretzels or something? The Goldblum. Yeah, absolutely. Why wouldn't that become a part of your Independence Day celebrations? Go down, get a couple of Goldblum pretzels. You can imagine the poster for that? It would be amazing. He's just there. He's wearing nothing. It's okay. It's not like you can see anything because he's all twisted up. His arms and legs are all sort of wrapped around. I think that would be absolutely fantastic. And and it turns out like David, which is Jeff, is like some kind of... I couldn't figure out what his job is, but he works at a cable company, right? No.
Yeah, doing something with satellites and whatever.
But
he's smart.
Yeah, he's a communications, code-breaking, signal-figuring-out, wizardy kind of... he's a wizard. Let's just say he's a wizard.
Sounds good.
He doesn't have a beard, though.
No, but he has those rock-hard abs.
He's a rock-hard shaven wizard. Mm-hmm. And then we meet, out in the boonies, out in the desert, we meet trailer trash Miguel and Alicia, whose crop dusting stepfather Russell is having all sorts of problems. The main problem being that he is Randy Quaid.
Yes, that's one. Humiliated, Miguel wanted to crawl into a hole and die. His stepfather, a notorious drunk around town, had put him through some embarrassing moments, but nothing like this.
Art imitating life. Do you know what Randy Quaid has been up to lately?
Last I heard, he and his wife barricaded themselves into a motel and stole a bunch of money and were drunk and on drugs or something.
Yeah, because I saw this post on a movie site where someone was like, "Oh, Randy Quaid does like hardcore porn on his like Vimeo page or whatever. You just think
God.
it's bad out your drink." And they were like, why isn't this a thing? Like, why don't people know? And you go to like his page and there's clips of him just talking. I'm just talking, I'm just rambling. I'm in like this dark, poorly lit room, just rambling like Charlie Sheen. And then suddenly he's performing like explicit sexual acts with his wife. It is crazy. And I guess it's not a thing because nobody gives a crap about Randy Quaid. Like,
Except you. You heard Randy Quaid hardcore pornography and thought, I have to look at that.
I didn't believe it. I didn't believe it, Lauren. Now I believe it. Now I can't unsee what I only briefly saw, to be fair. But, like, how fringe is that? Like, how... That's about as outsider as you can get. Like, just, you know, used to be in movies, and now he's, like, just making home movies in a trailer locked up somewhere. It's crazy.
I'll stick with the Dennis variety of Quaid.
Yes. Yes! I'll stick with Quaid from Total Recall, Arnold Schwarzenegger's character.
Get your ass
Get your
tomorrow.
ass to Mars. That's what. Why? Where was he when all this was going down? He could have been standing up on top of the White House, going, "Get your ass to Mars!" at the aliens.
That would have been better.
Probably a bit racist. So, look, so many characters. We don't have a hope of following everybody here, but so Connie works in the White House. Like, is she Goldblum's estranged lover?
Wife.
So
Yeah.
that's his ex-wife.
Yes.
And I couldn't remember who Nimziki is.
Nimziki is Secretary of Defense or something. Some pencil-pushing bureaucrat guy, Weasley guy.
Ah, well, I might know where he's pushing those pencils because Nimziki was a tall, gaunt man of 60, more age, who had earned the nickname the Iron Sphincter, and his
Nice.
department did go through a hell of a lot of pencils. It's always a problem with the accounting department. It's not important anyway who these people are. The important thing is that this big thing on the radar that's coming through space is breaking into smaller things, and they don't know if they should shoot it or not. I mean, that's how we would normally celebrate our independence, shooting things that we don't understand. And the president, President Pullman, is intense and brooding throughout.
General Gray turned to Whitmore and asked the grave question that had been gnawing away at all of them in the past hour. Mr. President, what happens if these things do become hostile? Whitmore thought for a second. Then God help us.
He's so grim. I remember at the time finding this hilarious, like all these depictions of the American president being this heroic badass, because at the time, Party Bill Clinton was the current president. So unless this president was gonna like sleep with someone and play the saxophone or do something crazy like that, I couldn't imagine. Like, I couldn't imagine Bill Clinton squeezing his pasty white thighs into a fighter jet to protect us from aliens. Very improbable. But, look at what Jeff Goldblum sees.
David wheeled around in his chair and saw a live picture from Australia. A giant plate of fire 15 miles wide was hanging in the sky over, you're going to make me say this, Melbourne.
Melbourne, yeah. I think that's crazy that it's Melbourne. Like, surely it would be Sydney, and like with the Opera House there and the bridge, and like they would be the only recognizable landmarks for Americans. I can't imagine any Americans knowing anything about Melbourne, which
At
is
the end,
a
it's
wonderful
Sydney.
place full of hipsters.
Really? I'll avoid it then.
They would have been looking up from their coffees
Were your hipsters around in the 90s?
and going, "Oh yeah, look at that bloody thing in the sky." Ah, well, back to
How
work.
ironic. Work? Hipsters work? Oh.
You know, there are like what I like about Melbourne is there's like laundromats which have like tanning beds in them.
Don't you live on the surface of the sun? Why would you possibly need a tanning bed?
Because you get like a fake one
Ew, no. Skin cancer,
Well,
my friend.
while you're drying your laundry.
Sure.
You know it makes sense. Where's your freedom now? Huh? Trying to take away our freedom to get a bloody fake tan. And this is pretty crazily overwritten. Like, David stood up unconsciously, waving the idea away. A sharp chill ran up his back, lodged itself in his brain, then erupted into a creepy variety of terror. Oh my god, they are attacking the English language.
It's like weirdly specific and vague at the same time.
What's a creepy variety of terror? Very strange. Not that evocative. Oh, and you know how Randy/Russell, the drunk, claims that he was abducted by aliens in the film?
Yes.
And it's kind of like a jokey throwaway thing, and then, you know, because he keeps saying, I've got experience with aliens, and then, of course, later on he has to fight the aliens. But in the book, we get a couple of pages of flashback of him really being abducted, and it's actually quite dark.
Then the experiments began. Unable to resist, Russell lay stretched out on his back while they invaded his body with several instruments that resembled medical probes.
At some point, I'm just going to take this off.
At some point, he remembered one of them lifting his head and laying it on its side so he could look out a window cut into the bottom of the ship. He recognized the vague outline of hills far below and remembered tears pouring off his face as the experiments continued while the whole side of his head was soaking wet.
Sounds like he just got drunk and went to a massage parlor.
Oh.
Who knows? And then the ships appear in the atmosphere. We get our first visual confirmation. Many others had collapsed to the ground, some praying, others cowering with their arms thrown over their heads. Thousands more. Armies of federal employees came tearing down the granite steps of their workplaces, sprinting, elbowing their way towards the entrances to the underground metro system. The thing in the sky inspired an all-immediate, all-consuming sense of dread, an angel of death grinding inexorably closer. So one thing I will say about this film, which is successful, and it's successful in a lot of their films, is that they do feel like global events. Like, they really feel like something that's happening and affecting a whole heap of people, unlike something like Terminator Genisys, which I just saw, which feels like it affects 5 people. But this, you know, they always show the reactions of the crowd and what's going on and how people are dealing with this thing. And I like that. I think that's what gives it that big-scale, global excitement.
Yeah, and that was a new thing with this movie, right? Like, the whole... That's why it was so long.
Yeah, well, I don't think even, like, big blockbuster movies were, like, 2.5 hours at that point. I mean, because something like Pulp Fiction was my benchmark of, oh, shit, that's a long movie, and that's 2.5 hours. I don't remember, like, going and seeing, I guess, like, the Star Wars films are long, but most things weren't. Alright, then we cut to LA and what is described as the most affluent Afro-American neighborhood in the country. His words, not mine.
But in the movie, they're all white except for this one family.
Where Will Smith, we've been thinking, like, isn't this a Will Smith movie? We haven't talked about him yet. We're half an hour in. He hasn't been in the first 66 pages of the book because the lazy bugger is sleeping through all of this.
Stephen Hiller, a handsome, muscular man in his late 20s, pushed himself reluctantly into a sitting position and stared back at the excited dog. That's not very nice to call his girlfriend. The sour expression on his face showed he needed another hour of sleep. He and Jasmine had been out late last night, closing down Hal's restaurant and hopping between nightclubs.
Yeah, he likes to party. Big Willie style.
He getting jiggy with it.
This was before all that, so he's still Little Willie at this point. I like this, though. We always, if it's good writing, we'll call it out. I think this is a really nice sentence describing one of the ships. Still, there was a certain dark magnetism about it, like microscopic photographs of fleas or fungus that reveal a certain hideous beauty. So that's good. That summons up a picture. I like that. And yeah, Will Smith is a pilot. He's a military man, so he figures that he'll go and check in because, giant spaceships in the sky. But not before giving his 6-year-old Dylan a whole bunch of fireworks. Not
even his 6-year-old, his girlfriend's 6-year-old.
Oh, I guess that makes it easier to...
That's kind of worse, I think.
Hand over a bunch of explosives, get him out of the way. At least he didn't fire them off on his head. Dylan tore back the wrapping to reveal a bundle of brightly coloured paper tubes with sticks attached. They looked like overgrown bottle rockets, and the name Fire Sticks was printed on each one because, honestly, Lauren, who doesn't want to spend the 5th of July in a pediatric burns unit?
Oh, yeah. Ooh.
And we haven't mentioned the First Lady properly yet, have we? We haven't described her.
I guess we're going to find out how old she is, right? Oh, maybe not. Let's
Oh,
see.
my lady never tells, Lauren.
Marilyn Whitmore had proven to be the single most popular figure in all of Washington. What Jacqueline Kennedy had done for glamour, Mrs. Whitmore had done with her down-to-earth style. She had won the heart of the nation by being the first lady to wander the halls of the White House in blue jeans and bare feet.
Okay, that sounds like a pretty easy heart to win, if that's all that it takes. And I just want to say, I know everyone loves her, but let's not get too attached to her, right?
Well, don't worry, she'll become the president later. In Battlestar
will she?
Galactica.
Oh, that's the one, yeah.
On another show.
Yeah. I didn't pick that up. That's cool. So this was kind of like an audition for that.
Yeah, exactly.
David has cracked the code. Jeff, good old Jeff, he's cracked the code. The signal is a countdown. And as he races to tell the president that he's cracked the code, he teaches his father about 1996 technology. I really love this passage. Quickly, he reached into the back seat, retrieved his laptop computer, and booted it up. From a plastic file sleeve, he extracted a CD-ROM and popped it into the computer's external drive slot. Just, look, already too much work for me. Julius, this is Julius is his father. Julius knew what a CD was, but he'd never seen one in person before. What the hell's that thing, he wanted to know. David held up the companion disc, Volume 2, waving it around with a fair amount of showmanship. On these two little discs, Pop, is every single phone book in America. Can you believe that? Just on two huge discs. Can you imagine, like, what he's going to think when he sees the iPhone? Like, they had no idea what was just around the corner, right?
This whole movie, the whole book, he's like, do you have my laptop computer? Where's my laptop computer?
Let me just boot it up. Go and make some coffee while it slowly loads.
I have to go on the internet.
He says at one point, like, have you ever played on the internet? The World Wide Web?
Yes.
The super cyber highway thing? And you look, while the world is panicking, Steve, Will Smith's wife, or girlfriend, Jasmine, is stripping.
Jasmine didn't know why she was about to walk out on stage. She just wanted to get it over with. The whole day had been a slow walk through a brightly lit nightmare. Even now, adjusting her straps on her silk bikini, she felt as if she were floating.
This always bugged me while I watched the film is, like, what time of day is it? Like, Will Smith just woke up. Is she stripping for, like, the brunch crowd?
Yes.
They want to see what she had for breakfast while their breakfast?
They have fantastic buffet deals at these strip clubs.
I'll bet they do. There's a couple of poached eggs right in front of me. Vertical bacon sandwich.
Oh, too much.
What? That wasn't me.
That was you.
That was a sound-alike that poked their mischievous head through the window. Get out of here, you. Sorry. But I guess at least this gives the author a chance to deviate from the stripper stereotypes, right?
Tiffany was a mental and emotional basket case. She had a drug habit and an addiction to abusive men.
Okay, maybe not. And then, like, straight away after that, we have some 1996 homophobia. So think about this. Just then, some guys from another flight team walked by. They saw Jimmy down on one knee, holding out an engagement ring to Captain Hiller. A couple of them did a double take. Realizing how queer it must look, Jimmy and Steve jumped away from one another in panic. God created Adam and Eve, not Jimmy and Steve. Please.
Oh, party hard. Not in this country anymore.
Yeah,
America!
well, that's what we should be celebrating. Isn't that amazing that this is 19 years ago? We've got just some casual homophobia in this book about one of the biggest blockbusters of the year. And then 19 years later, we've got marriage equality all across America. That's something to celebrate.
I'm dancing. You
You're
can't see me.
dancing in an absolutely fabulous way. I'm dancing too.
No, you're not.
I am on the inside.
Don't lie to the listeners.
I'm dancing from the waist down.
Okay.
Goldblum and his dad get in to meet the president. God knows how they managed to do this, but they did. It involved the ex-wife. That's why she was there. And look, Goldblum's dad is the most Jewish character I've ever seen. Like, he's, up until this point, Krusty the Clown's dad was the most Jewish character I'd ever seen. But this guy is just, like, I don't understand anything he says because I'm the fish out of water here. Oi, if I had known I was going to meet the president, he said loudly, I'd worn a tie. Will ya look at me? I look like a schlemiel.
Very good. You said schlemiel right.
Yeah.
What? There's nothing else to say.
You've got a note.
Yes, sorry. That's Judd Hirsch, Mr. Jewish. He mentioned Masada earlier, which is a very Jewish reference that I don't know if you got that one.
I did not.
I did.
Awesome.
I'm smart.
You're so smart.
It's a
America
I'll
must
tell you what
hate
it
you. What is
They
it?
do.
Give us a teaching
It's-
moment.
I will. Okay, Masada is a fortress that was carved into a mountainside strategically in a valley in Israel. So in the ancient times, they had a fortress there to block the strategic entry into Israel. And then in the year 73-ish, the Romans attacked again, and they barricaded themselves inside the fort of Masada, and then they were going to lose, so they had a mass suicide of about 1,000 people. And so when the Romans got up there, they were all dead. It was like their last stand.
That's
And it's still there. You can go see the city inside the mountain. It's a huge tourist destination.
the body's still there?
I doubt it.
Okay. Man, those Romans needed a lot of air fresheners.
Aww.
So the president sends up Operation Welcome Wagon. That's not a very American thing to do, but anyway. It's a helicopter with a ballpark lighting board thing welded to it to broadcast messages of peace and probably like advertisements for Coca-Cola or something. Turns out the aliens do not give a crap. A spike of green light suddenly streaked across the night sky and smashed against the helicopter, shredding it in a single burst. It looked like a dragonfly being taken out by a .22 caliber shell.
Which I guess is something.
Yeah, it's like,
I don't know.
you might have trouble imagining like what happens when a helicopter's hit by a laser. So let's think of something that you do know what it looks like. A dragonfly being hit by a .22 caliber shell. So thanks Molstad.
Yeah, that was helpful.
And some people are making the most of it though. Why wasn't this in the film?
The birthday suit was another popular costume. In the big dance circle at the center of the roof, a bunch of young hippies, deadhead types, had stripped off their clothes and were entranced in a writhing naked group dance.
That's your film. Maybe that'll be the sequel. And they all get blown up. And then luckily the president and crew escape at Goldblum's insistence. I was going to say existence. He was able to insist because he did exist. Just lost my notes. I'm really confused now. Things are being really weird. There we go. This is the big moment. This is the key moment. This is the White House getting blown up. Do you want to give us this one?
Yes. In Washington, the White House and all the buildings flanked the mall area. The Lincoln and Jefferson memorials, the Smithsonian Museum complex were instantly torn to shreds, decimated. From there, the blast materialized into a tidal wave of fire rushing outward. In the blink of an eye, it blew apart and instantly consumed the Capitol building, taking most of the hill with it. And in the other direction, the Pentagon was flattened, blown to smithereens. The same grisly scene was repeating in cities around the world. Everywhere the giant ships were stationed, 36 of humanity's proudest creations, home to millions upon millions of people, were swiftly and systematically obliterated.
The end. So, thank you everybody for listening, and we'll catch you next. I was hoping so at that time. I love that Melbourne is one of the 36 of humanity's proudest creations. That's they'll be thrilled to hear that.
What do they have there that they created?
Well,
Hipsters.
there's these laundromats. That
Oh, all right. That's worth it.
And look, no word from the First Lady's helicopter, though. That seems to have crashed or something. All three of them now were positive that the First Lady had been killed in the blast. The President's face lost all its colour. He felt like he'd just been kicked in the gut. But he was still the leader of his nation, and he responded by quickly refocusing on his duty. America's got a job to do. No dead wife's gonna stop Bill Pullman from punching these aliens in the face. What a country. This is what America's all about, right?
Yeah, no time for feelings.
Just let's kick some ass. Kick ass America. And Steve, Will Smith, and the Black Knights, which are his crew, get in their American jets, but they are swarmed by a surprise release of alien fighters, and I quite like the description here.
The gray enemy planes, gliding like metallic stingrays, were firing pulses of supercondensed energy, deadly balls of light that screamed as they sizzled through the sky, leaving a bright white trail. Pew, 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 pew.
Molsted's, like, he's a good writer for this. I do feel like he makes this book an appropriate event. Like, he matches the size of the film, and he really is able to write action very, very well. The only problem is, like, the action descriptions are great, but Steve's dialogue, Will Smith's dialogue, is just ridiculous. Things like, damn it, you're really starting to burn me up, you damn Darth Vader wannabe, and... damn you! Okay, if you're the sucker who's gonna take me out, I want to see if you can fly undercover. Sucker! Like, is this the 70s now? Did I miss something? What is going on? And Steve crashes along with an enemy ship, and he investigates the ship, and an alien pops out, if you can believe that. Who would have thought there would be an alien in an alien ship?
A large shell-like head emerged unsteadily into the sunlight. Beneath deep, empty eye sockets, the creature had a protruding snout, a tangled mask of cartilage, jutting forward like an oily white roots of a tree. Moist tentacles ran off the chin and ears, feeling the edge of the escape hatch.
But, of course...
After watching the repulsive animal struggle towards sunlight for a moment, Steve performed his sworn duty.
His sworn American duty.
With one savage punch, he clocked the alien square in the face. Yeah!
But he doesn't say, welcome to Earth, like he does in the film. That's like the big line. That's Will Smith's proudest moment. And it's not in the book, which means I hope he just ad-libbed it. I hope that genius was pure... Will Smith. You see, I don't say duty because it's got a friggin' U in it. I say duty, like a refined English gentleman.
You're not English.
Well, my family's English. We're an English colony.
Look, Luke. We both grew up in English prison colonies, so let's not pretend like we're English.
I'm a fancy man from Fancyland. Oh, I'm sorry. Have I gotten a little bit too fancy for you?
Yes. Oh, yes, darling. Let's move on with the next part of this.
Oh, I like that. I like to fancy myself as a bit of a fancier, which is to say, I fancy all that is fancy. Okay, look, I don't want to spoil this with more Will Smith dialogue, but he does say,
you had to come down here with an attitude. Now you got me out here pulling your potato chip munching, slime dripping ass across the burning desert with your dreadlocks hanging out the back.
Where did he get potato chip munching from? And how is that an insult in any planet? Like, that's just a random thing for Will Smith to say to this big slobbering tentacled alien. Call him potato chip munchin'.
Because it has some good alliteration. I don't know.
What if there was a potato chip munchkin?
Oh, that would be cool.
We know there's a lollipop guild. So, what if there's a potato chip guild as well? Maybe that's what he was thinking of. I think that's it. I think that's definitely 100%. You heard it here first. Go on to IMDb, update the trivia. That's what happened. And look, I was talking about how great they do with the scale, that this is a really big globe-spanning event, but turns out, just as the little munchkins at Disneyland told us, it's a small world after all, because Jasmine, the stripper with a heart of gold, just happens to run into the crashed helicopter of the First Lady and help her out. and the crashed Steve just happens to run into crazy Randy Quaid and get a lift for him in his trailer.
Wow, that's so coincidental.
How many people are
you know.
in the United States? What's the population there?
I don't know.
25 squillion?
I know that Manhattan has 8 million.
Yeah, so...
New York City alone has 8 million.
Stretching it a little bit for my liking.
But I always happen to run into Ethan Hawke when I live there. So.
Really? How many times
It
would
is
you
a
say you have run into Ethan Hawke?
A lot.
Was it usually before sunrise?
Usually while he was buying cigarettes.
Yeah. So the president, he is taken to Area 51, which he didn't know existed. He didn't know that, America's had contact with these aliens before. It's all a big cover-up. And we get all the exposition from Brent Spiner's outlandish Dr. Brackish Oakham. I didn't even realize it was him until I looked afterwards. And then as soon as I realized, I was like, of course it was him. Like, look at that guy. But look, I didn't care about all that. I want to know, how old is he?
Dr. Brackish Oaken was the director of research at Area 51, about 45 years old. Oaken had a full head of wild gray hair falling to his
He
shoulders.
sure did. He had a mane. He was like an old lion.
Yes, and he kind of dies in this movie, and he's listed in the credits for the sequel.
Ooh, that's a bit
So-
curious. And you know who else
Brent
is here? Major Mitchell, played by bloody Adam Baldwin.
Adam Baldwin.
Alleged
So young.
garbage person. Adam Baldwin. Scourge of women everywhere, allegedly. A man who... A strong adult man who has fought for the betterment of ethics in video games. Even though I did see him recently and he said that he wasn't a gamer himself. But, so, that's sacrifice, isn't it? To like, really stick up for that, even though you've never played a game. To really be concerned about the ethics in video game journalism. So, yeah, bless him. He's there too. Mostly sort of grimacing and shooting things with guns, which, again, art imitates life. So, Area 51 has a captured alien spacecraft, which is as good as opportunity as any to mix some metaphors.
The group moved onto an observation platform face to face with the darkly fascinating bird, displayed like a sleeping stegosaurus in a hushed museum.
Oh, one of those stegosaurus birds that we've
Yes.
heard so much about. Love it. They also have 3 aliens at the facility, all dead.
The only good alien is a dead alien.
Yeah, you said it, sister.
Their spindly bodies hung like kite tails from large bulbous heads. Gentle black eyes the size of 8 balls on either side of the tiny beak-like nose gave their faces a startled expression, as if they were just as surprised as the earthlings on the other side of the glass.
You'd be surprised too if you had 8 balls. And I've often wondered, like, this is something that bugged me in the movie when I first saw it. And I don't know if this is referenced in the film. I didn't catch it if it was, but it is explained in the book. Now, later on, when Goldblum's in the alien craft, he's on, like, these upholstered leather seats. And I'm like, I
Yes.
could not imagine the seamstress aliens making these things. I was like, what? That's the least alien seats around. The book clears it up. Did these seats come standard? David asked, planting himself in one of the leather chairs bolted to the floor. Well, Okan told him the whole story of how the chairs got there, replacing a set of slimy body pods. David took an interest in one of the instruments.
That's what I like about the book. It explains more about the ship, and like they're organic and they grow the ship, and it was interesting.
This is my prediction for the future, because, we saw here how the CD-ROM was in its infancy and how exciting that was. Now we're in a world where virtual reality is going to be the next big thing with gaming. And when we get into virtual reality, there's going to be a lot of different peripherals for different games. So my prediction is that at some point, maybe Japan is going to release a peripheral called the Slimy Body Pod.
Hey, I saw a movie about virtual reality once. It was called Lawnmower Man.
Lawnmower
So
Man.
haven't we already mastered virtual reality?
Yeah, well, that has some pretty amazing graphics too.
Oh, it was the best, the most
yeah.
up to date.
And he mowed lawns in a virtual world. And those people had just the most beautifully, freshly mowed virtual lawns that you could ever hope to see. You just, take 10 pixels off the top and it was just perfect.
Pixels.
And then, look, it's an even smaller world because Steve and Randy Quaid rocks up with the new alien body to Area 51. So now everybody's just wandering down to Area 51. This place that not even the president knew existed. And now there's this big house party. It's like House Party 2 there. Possibly even House Party 3. And a little bit of booty call.
I shouldn't encourage you.
This has got to be the best line in the book. Mommy, can I have some more weenies? God bless America for continually simplifying / babifying the English language. Mm-hmm. Weenies.
It's our best national export.
Weenies. And during the autopsy of the alien, it springs to life and takes over Ocken,
whichever.
Spiner.
Yes.
And this is, what you were talking about him being, kind of dead.
Once more, it punched the window with Oaken's limp body. It was quickly learning how to work the speech organs of the man's not-quite-dead body. This time the words were clear and loud. Release me!
So the president, like Pullman, he has a full-on conversation with this dead alien. And in the book, he actually gets quite a long vision he sort of goes inside the alien's mind and gets a clear picture of what their plans are. To him, we were vermin, filthy little things that needed to be exterminated, and that was their plan, to wipe humanity off the face of this small planet. These aliens mean business, and so the president has no choice but to decide to nuke them all.
Woohoo!
But before you get too excited, before you put down your 6-gun, it doesn't work. The ships are shielded.
Yeah, you think they would know that since they have one of the ships in their possession for 50 years?
It's shielded.
Yeah.
We didn't think it all through.
Yeah.
And it's a small world, once again, because Steve steals a helicopter and lands it right next to Jasmine and the injured First Lady. And really, it's only a page later, and she's reunited with the president, and I'm sorry to say, listeners, she dies.
They cried and kissed and looked into one another's eyes until she fell asleep for the last time.
Today, I will celebrate my independence from my wife.
Now he can go after the assistant.
Yeah, who was quite attractive.
Yes, she is.
So then Goldblum, he cracks his brilliant plan, which is to fly a ship with Will Smith, an alien ship, into an alien mothership, give it a computer virus with his laptop.
Computer.
The shields or some shit, and then blow it all up. Nimziki is probably the only one that gets it here.
Oh, spare me the bad science fiction, Nimziki moaned from his rail. This plan is so full of what-ifs, it's ridiculous.
Man speaks the truth. Somebody's aware of what's going on. And speaking of ridiculous, there is the absolutely shitty scene where the British pilots get excited about hearing the Americans' plans, and it's full of really crappy dialogue written by an American of how they think British people talk. And one of them is named Reginald Cummins. And they say things like, "What in the bloody hell was that all about?" And "I don't think these chaps have caught the family spirit of the thing." So...
Oh, yes. Oh, the Americans have a plan. Hooray, we're saved.
Hurrah!
Hurrah.
So, yes, what we have learnt is that in 1996, the American screenwriters' rule of thumb was to write all black people like a 70s blaxploitation film, and the British people like they were in a 1940s war story for boys.
Sounds about right.
A little bit of Biggles in there. And then the president does his dumb speech. This is another famous bit. And this is his lame attempt to make the rest of the world give a shit about July the 4th. I have to let you read this, Lauren.
Oh.
It can only be spoken by an American. I would probably melt into a puddle if I tried.
All right. The 4th of July will no longer be known as an American holiday, but as the day when all the nations of the earth stood shoulder to shoulder and shouted, "We will not lay down and die! We will live on! We will survive! Today," he thundered, "we celebrate our Independence Day!"
Now I regret being on Skype because I've got tears streaming down both cheeks. I'm so moved by the brave and noble America bailing out all of our dumb foreign asses. Their plan's amazing. They get a lot of deadbeats, including drunk Randy Quaid, to fly all of their fancy planes, and the president himself gets into a jet, flies off into the air to save the world.
Whitmore was already suiting up and inspecting one of the jets. He smiled at his old friend and explained, "I'm a pilot, Will. I belong in the air." He pulled his helmet on, adding, "I'm not going to ask these people to take any risks if I'm not willing to take myself. Think about what it would mean for the people to learn the American president was killed."
Yeah, we'd get over it. And then a massive multi-page action scene where Will Smith and Jeff Goldblum set off the virus. They blow up the mothership. The president shoots things. It's all well written by Molstead. If you do like this film, this isn't a bad book. And Randy Quaid sacrifices himself while screaming, "Up yours." Great final words.
Yep.
How would you describe what he does, Lauren?
I don't know.
I'm just looking at your note here.
I wrote a note. He drives up into the penis tip of the ship's laser.
Metaphorically speaking, of course.
The whole ship looks like a huge Georgia O'Keeffe painting.
Yeah. This reminds me, when I was in high school and in the library,
you had to walk uphill both ways in the snow. Right?
Yes. Yeah. Without any feet. We were a co-ed high school, so there were magazines there for young girls. And one of them was called Dolly, which Australian listeners will probably remember that one. It was a magazine for teenage girls, and it had a health section and an advice section.
Uh-oh.
Now, we used to read those and get a little bit of a laugh. And one of them was this guy had written in, and he had supposedly put a pin down the hole of his penis, and then he couldn't get it out again. And the Dolly Doctor, which was the name of this particular column, said,
"Go to the hospital, stupid."
What you need to do is go to a doctor. Now, this is like probably 1991 or 1992. So I imagine either they created these letters themselves, just in case anyone had these problems and were too afraid to talk about it, or some guy put a pin in his penis and then typed out a letter,
mailed it,
took it to the post office, mailed it, waited about 2 months for it to be published, and went, "Oh, I gotta go to a doctor." Crazy to me.
Oh, man. Yeah, that sounds made up, I hope.
I hope so too. Anyway, Russell's bomb had set off a chain reaction that tripped through the body of the 15-mile wide ship, melting the entire vessel from within. One after another, the thunderous internal explosions turned the monster in the sky red, exposing its internal architecture like an X-ray. Well, yeah, that's nicely written. And America saves the day.
As usual. You are welcome, world.
We appreciate it. And then we're up to the ending. That's the ending. Whitmore's hope had come to pass. July 4th would no longer merely be an American holiday.
It was a new future, and leaders like Whitmore were anxious to help shape the new world that would be built upon the ruins of the old. They knew the direction and character of this rebuilding would be determined early, within the first few months. There was every possibility for America, one of the most violent and divided nations in the world, to tear itself apart in a struggle over scarce resources, but there was also the possibility of people coming together, cooperating with one another in the spirit of community that would set an example for others around the globe.
Before the dust of the battles had settled, Whitmore would be on the campaign trail once again, making essentially the same call to service and self-sacrifice he had delivered during his run for the presidency. But this time, the scope would be international and the risks much higher. What kind of world would he pass on to his daughter?
As the rebuilding began, one fact quickly made itself abundantly clear. The human spirit, like the supple, tenacious weeds already beginning to push their way up through the ruins, would once again reassert itself, together, smarter, and more unified than ever.
Oh my God, America. I'm really tearing up here. That was absolutely beautiful. You know, I remember, I will say this to America's credit. I remember this was the first film that I watched and began to feel that, like, America's kind of conceited here. Like, America's acting like a bunch of jerks. Like, who do they think they are? And this was, you know, back in 96. At a younger age, I sort of went, this is some patriotic bullshit. But watching it again the second time, I was like, oh, this is pretty tame. Oh, yeah, well, I didn't think it was actually that bad in that sense. Even though it's called Independence Day and the, you know, president flies a jet and saves the world. It actually is a lot tamer than things that have happened, than probably like American Sniper, right?
Yes, I've not seen American Sniper, but yes.
Me neither, but let's just say yes. That was Independence Day. What a way to celebrate.
Yes, we're all excited about the possibility of people coming together.
Never forget Independence Day, and then making a sequel, which is just absolutely wonderful. I wish it could be Independence Year, all year round. Would love it. I got to ask you, Lauren, as I always do, was the book better?
I'm going to actually say I think the book was better.
It is a good book. I think
it's good.
Like, it does a pretty good job, I've got to admit. That's a tough one.
Because it has a lot of the self-awareness that the author put in, that a lot of this stuff is kind of dumb.
Yeah,
but it also, it has more detail that the movie kind of glosses over, because it has to have all those longing looks, people staring at each other and stuff like that. There's more actual plot in the book than there is in the movie.
I'm torn. I was going to go with the movie, but I think you...
But the movie's got explosions and aliens, so I don't know.
I'm going to go with the movie. I can't help myself.
All right.
When you don't know, go low brow. So there are a couple of Amazon reviews here that I would love to share with you and get your opinion on. How about this one? I read the book countless times and watched the movie goodness knows how many times, and still it leaves me awed. This is the kind of book I'll bring wherever I go. The idea of all humanity coming together is an idea that will sit in your mind always. So I love that someone, was genuinely inspired by this, really thought, yeah, like, this Independence Day is providing a really strong moral center for me. What do you think about, like, carrying this book around wherever you go, like taking it with you?
I actually did take it with me on a retreat I was at a couple of weeks ago. I took it to Virginia.
Yeah. I guess the good thing is, like, if you didn't want to carry the book around everywhere, you could probably just bring along 5 CD-ROMs. And it would all just fit neatly on there.
Yeah.
Just put them in some plastic folders and put that in a bag with your
laptop.
With
my laptop computer.
Take an external drive to run the CDs and hook all that up and you'd be fine. I actually think, now this might be a bit of a bold statement, hotel rooms across America, I'm not saying get rid of the Bible, but why not put Independence Day right in there next to it? I mean, they're both great American bits of literature with great messages that we can all learn from, right?
The ancient Romans were American? Wow.
Yeah, well, I mean, like, they got into the spirit.
Mm-hmm.
America kind of owns it now.
Sure, whatever you say.
And here's another one. Watch the movie first for the breathtaking special effects. Only then, if you're interested, should you buy the book because it has a few more details in it. I pity those who bought the hardcover.
I
couldn't figure that out. Like, I was like, why do they pity them? And then I realized because you're going to want to carry this book around everywhere, and it's going to get heavy.
But hardcover is helpful if you meet an alien. You can bash it in the face and say, "Welcome to America."
That is true as well, but, assumedly there'd be at least 3 or 4 guns on a person at any given time, so...
Can I do the next one?
All right, go for it. You gotta read it exactly as it is, though.
I will. Independence Day was a beautiful story. It was scary and took me on a adventurous journey. It had my favorite fan in it, quote, Will Smith, end quote.
What I love about this is that, a lot of us are fans of Will Smith. Like, it's in our DNA. We can't help it. Like, we all want to get jiggy with it. But Will Smith is this person's fan.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, this Amazon reviewer
I know who it is.
Who is it?
It's M. Night Shyamalan.
Oh, I think you might be right.
Yeah. Will Smith is a big fan of his that he did that horrible After Earth movie.
He did, but notice Will Smith is in quotation marks. So it's like, Will Smith, if that is your name. Like, casting doubts on the Fresh Prince. What's that all about?
Never doubt Will Smith. That's un-American.
And finally, this is really interesting. Even though this was written after the fact, I found the book to be an enjoyable read, and as I usually do, liked the book over the theatrical release, although I might be a bit biased due to the author being my uncle. He nicely included my brother and I in the book as the doctors who get killed during the alien autopsy. Now, there is a gift from an uncle. Killed off the nephews during an alien autopsy. Murdered them both in cold blood. Had them probed and strangled by tentacles. Absolutely wonderful.
Well, tentacles.
That's certainly a person that feels that the book was better.
Because his name was in it.
Yeah,
now I'm
that's
tempted
right.
to go back and look. Now that I own this book, because it's not digital,
No, that's
I can
right.
go back and look it up. And it has 8 pages of color photographs.
Does it really?
Mine does, yeah.
Oh, mine doesn't, but I thought we had the same look. I'm going to hold mine up, because we do. We have physical copies of the book. See? Is that the one you've got?
Yeah, that's it. But I think I have a newer version.
Yeah, no photos.
Oh, I have
Damn.
8 pages of color photos.
8 pages of colour photographs.
Yeah. I don't have it on me, but yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, that went nowhere then.
Believe me.
Lauren, I believe you.
I would not
believe in
tell
you.
a lie. Thanks.
All right. Well, yeah, that was Independence Day, believe it or not. Amazing. Thank you so much, Lauren. Absolute pleasure to have an American expert on this sacred holiday of all holidays.
Yes, the high holy holidays.
That's right. And please, everybody, do listen to the other podcasts. FPcast every Monday, general pop culture podcast. Just reviewed Terminator Genesis. That's going to save you some money if you listen to that. Also, ScarJo A Go-Go is on hiatus until Age of Ultron turns up on Blu-ray. Please rate reviewers on iTunes. You can find out everything we're doing at www.fruitlesspursuits or geekvision.tv. And if you are a super fan, you can support us on patreon.com/fruitlesspursuits and get some bonus material. There'll be a BWB TV coming up soon, which will be about Degrassi High, a nice Joey Jeremiah episode. So I'm looking forward to doing that. That'll be with Leah.
How about X-Files? X-Files.
X-Files, yeah, X-Files. X-Files might be coming down the pipeline at some point too. Gotta do something for our Patreon subscribers before they get bored after 2 months of very little.
Yes, my $5. You
That's
better
right.
prove
We
that
gotta
you
earn it.
earned my $5.
I'm going to dance for it.
Monkey.
Yeah, that's dancing.
Yes, dancing doesn't work on a podcast either.
No, well, but that was just for you. Because that's the thing. It's bonus material for those that help us out. So yeah, I will dance on Skype for you at any time of the day or night. Just ring me up, I'll drop what I'm doing. And I will dance for all our subscribers. Not a real offer. Okay. Well, I think that's it. I think we're done. Australia, America, we've done it again.
Yep. For the record books.
That, yes, absolutely. Flip to a page in the record books. That's what you're going to see is a koala riding a bald eagle in honor of what we just achieved here. So thanks again, Lauren. It's been awesome.
My pleasure.
I absolutely love celebrating my independence with you.
Good.
Never forget freedom, colors don't run, etc., etc.
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
Do you want to say the thing?
Of course. Catch you on the flips.
Jumanji.